Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to my featured talk. I'm going to talk about a few things today. I'm going to talk about, primarily about a tweet that I tweeted once last summer. Do I need to introduce myself? Do people know who I am? Do you know why you're here? My name is Jessica Hopper. I am a music journalist and author. I've worked in the music industry for the last approximately 22 years. I work at MTV now. What I'm saying is not affiliated with MTV. I'm speaking purely as my own person here. So I'd like to talk a bit about the conditions of work for primarily women in the music industry, and then also talk a bit about some of the things that we can do to make the music industry and the worlds in which we work a more just and equitable place for all people to be working. And I will also be speaking with the idea that everybody who is in this room is here because they are interested in being part of that solution. So last August, I was getting ready to go give a talk in another land of Australia. And like a lazy journalist, I tweeted something in order to crowdsource the answers and information. And I sent out a tweet trying to sort of gauge what people's experiences in the music industry had been. And the tweet was something like, what was your first experience with being marginalized or told that you didn't matter in the scope of music? And I got maybe in the first day about 60, 70, 80 responses. And perhaps because I'm a little cynical after working in the music industry for so long, I thought, oh, these are kind of the responses I expected. It was a lot of people talking about, loading in at shows and having sound guys assume that they are somebody's girlfriend, or perhaps even worse, that they were there because they're groupies, not because they're headlining a show. Or a lot of people talking about just not being given the same opportunities, or being discriminated against, or being sexually harassed. Or one of the I wouldn't even say it's funnier, but notable tweets was also a woman saying, she's a manager at a major venue in New York, and that lots of times the DJs and artists that play there will only really listen to directions when they're given by her male intern. And it was a lot of these things that showed the sort of baseline condition and the everyday sort of travails of working in the music industry as a musician, as people on the creative and business side, as music journalists, and it being reinforced to you over and over again that maybe this isn't the place for you, that this is still an unexpected place for women. And if you are here, you probably shouldn't really be expected to, you shouldn't, getting respect in every situation that you go into is going to be fairly uncommon. And so at the same time, as I said, I'm going to retweet these things, because even though they're sort of common knowledge to me, maybe they're not common knowledge to everybody else. And I retweeted them, and in the next 19 hours approximately, another 900 people tweeted back replies. And I retweeted as many of them as I could. I think I retweeted about the first 400 or 500. And within a few weeks, there were thousands of replies. And it really, I think, underlined some of the baseline conditions for women working in the music industry, the sort of discrimination and doubt that they face on an everyday basis that makes it an inherent struggle for women who are trying to work in this world. And for a lot of people, well, just judging by the tweets, people who were replying saying, I had no idea. I had no idea that it was like this. Or people sometimes seeing their own perhaps things that they've done, like, oh, I always offer to carry the equipment of the women in my band. I just assume that they can't do it. I didn't realize that was, sexist. And it was a revelation for a lot of people, but I think for a lot of women and marginalized people within music, it was simply cracking the door on what we deal with every day, and the way that it can weigh on us and act as sort of a blanket discouragement. And I think one of the things that we can look at when we see all these people saying, like, I didn't know, there's a few different factors that all sort of collude to basically silence people and silence these narratives. And even though we can look and say, like, oh, there's some dialogue happening around, like, Heathcliff Baru, everybody knows what I'm talking about with that, right? Don't need to go into it. Or, even R. Kelly, or obviously what's going on with Kesha and her battle that she is waging very valiantly and bravely right now. That we can sort of say, okay, there's like a collective conversation happening. Why are people surprised? Why don't people know about this? And I think there's a few things. When women are faced with barriers and disappointment and marginalization in such an everyday way, what a lot of these tweets said were women saying that they were dropping out because they didn't want to deal with this, because it was so discouraging, because it was such so many constant affronts to them being there, whether it was the sexist sound guy or whether, it was, female sound people not being able to be hired because people just didn't think that they were technical and that they couldn't handle it, or, just all of these different things. That what ends up happening is people make music in their bedrooms and don't put it out because they don't want to participate in a space where they are marginalized, because it takes a lot out of you. When I spoke in Australia after this talk, I got a really long letter the next day from a woman who'd been trying to work as a sound woman in Australia for about a decade. And she said she had just recently quit because no one would employ her. And there were only 9 sound women in the whole of the country. And she had sort of struggled this whole time. She had offered to sell T-shirts and do sound for free just so that she could do this thing that she loved. And it was really difficult to see her male peers or men that she was better than succeed, to be networked into like the bro culture, that I think is especially prevalent in Australia as it is here, within music, where you're hiring, dudes who you're buddies with, basically. And we also can see in things like a few years ago, Janet Weiss wrote a piece about being on tour, drumming with Sleater Kinney, and about every single stop that the band made, the sound guy would assume that she didn't know how to set up her drums. Now, mind you, this is Sleater Kinney basically at the height of their fame, and they're headlining and playing places where, it's like 1,500, 2,000 people. And there's still this assumption that somebody who could be at that level of fame could literally not set up their own drums. And she, in this tour diary, she chronicles, she dealt with it every single night. And you have to wonder, what would music look and feel and sound like if women weren't dropping out in the numbers that they do? What would the music industry at large look and feel like? What sort of records would come out? What sort of messages would be more prevalent? What sort of things would happen differently if we valued women as fans, if we valued them more as creative forces, and if we gave them the encouragement and the resources and the respect that they need in order to stay and be present and contribute creatively. Because right now, what we're doing is telling people that you have to struggle to participate. And of course, we all know the music industry is a difficult place to be, and that it's very competitive, so naturally there's some struggle. But there is also this underlying idea that it's supposed to be hard, and by virtue of it being hard, that it will weed out the people who don't deserve to be here, or who aren't, sort of tough enough to hack it, or if your band is good enough, you will succeed. And what that doesn't acknowledge is that there is the underlying conditions of just being in this world, of what sort of art is valued by whom, what sort of messages are valued, the fact that women are supposed to keep their pain and their struggles, particularly in this world, silent in order to continue to be here, that is basically the unspoken rule. And you also have to think about if women are being faced with all of these struggles to be here and to constantly have to kind of like do the better job and do this big kabuki of that we're here for the right reasons, or we deserve to be paid for shows, or all of the sort of effort that you have to go through for that acknowledgement to be seen, for your work to be valued, to be met with this respect. It takes away so much time that we could all be spending on the actual creative efforts that we're trying to be here to make. That we spend so much time evangelizing to people to try to get them to respect the work, or to treat us fairly, or to pay us, or to pay us equally. And all of that could be going into the records we could be making, or the art we could be making, or the articles we could be writing. And if we did feel welcome, how would that change things? And so when we sort of disappear into our bedrooms, or when we just say, oh, I'm just gonna make like my fanzine for my friends instead of trying to get this job at Spin or Pitchfork or wherever we really wanna work, what voices do we lose? What diversity do we lose? People, if they're just disappearing from this, we have no accountability really for the work, no accounting for the work that they've made sometimes. One of the women who came and spoke to me after my talk in Australia was talking about she had been so discouraged by this mentor that she had, who is a famous jazz musician, I believe, in Australia, who in her year of mentorship with him, he would only refer to her as bitch for the whole year. And she was so bummed out by this that she just stopped playing. And this conference that she'd come to that was sort of, akin to this, but in Australia, she said it was the first time in 4 years. It had taken her 4 years to kind of get back on her feet making music because she had felt so discouraged by all of this. And you have to wonder, what are the stories that we're not hearing about all of this too? Because there is such a price for people coming forward about what's happening to them. There are different prices. There is a different bar to clear, particularly in a music industry where not just women are marginalized, but there are different, there's sort of different penalties, if you will, for women of color, for queer people, for trans people, that it's not simply like an even playing ground, even when it comes to naming what you're up against, or naming a name, or coming out that you are faced with the fact that maybe you might not ever get a job again in the same world. The other issue is, being faced with the prospect of dropping out. When music means as much to you as it does to all of us, the thought that either I can put up with this and just accept that this is the terms of working in music, and the other option is dropping out, and maybe I go work at a restaurant, or maybe I go do something that is not my passion, that is not my calling. It makes it so that we just have to exist in a place where we're sort of constantly sucking it up. And I think that makes us numb to all of these, whether they're microaggressions or whether they're really overt or covert discrimination. What we wind up with is just internalizing it and wondering if there's ways, like, if I did this differently, if I did this magic thing differently, or magically different, would this stop happening to me? And lots of times the question that I get after I speak at, schools or other events, whatnot, is, can you suggest to me like what I can do so that people stop harassing me or that people take my band seriously, or how I deal with this promoter in our town that keeps hitting on me every time my band plays there, and I feel so uncomfortable, but it's the only place in town to play. And we understand that it just doesn't behoove us professionally to really name what's going on. I think that's starting to change, particularly in the last few months, that this seems to be a discussion that a lot of people are more interested and willing to have. And it's also happening, especially online, whether people are willing to have that conversation, to be receiving the information about the basic condition of women working in the music industry. I think the other thing that is starting to become more and more evident is that we don't have any sort of resources, particularly aimed at women who are struggling within the music industry. There's not a sweet relief or like a MAP fund for us for women who are dealing with sexual assault. There is no place that you can go and arbitrate something if you have been sexually harassed by your boss. Usually your option is, you either suck it up or you quit. There is no sort of like grand plan HR for the music industry. Oftentimes, many of us are working for small shops, small businesses, independent promoters, places where there might be 3 people working, and there is no person there who is really able to help you. There are just not resources. And I think what we can see now is that there really, really needs to be. I don't know who is supposed to be in charge of making that. It's not me. But I really think that if we understand that all of this is basically like a quiet epidemic within music, that there has to be some way that we can get traction on it in both the sort of cultural way, where there are networks of support just person to person, but also a way that we can reconcile this in a bigger way. The other thing that keeps this whole epidemic of sorts quiet is that power protects people. And we know that from R. Kelly. We know that from even in the case of Heathcliff Baru, journalists coming forward and saying, I dealt with this because I couldn't have my access to these bands that he represented and worked with cut off, because that was part of my livelihood, because everyone's trying to have their career. Or we can see that also in the case of Jian Ghomeshi, the CBC broadcaster who was sexually abusing women, and a lot of people knew for a lot of years that he was a creep. And once he was finally caught, people said, well, I kind of kept quiet because I needed to be on his show, because I needed what help he could bring to me. I needed that attention. And so his power protected him, even though everybody knew that he was a creep. The thing that is very fortunately changing, we can look to Canada for a lot of examples of how to deal with this, because Canada seems to be learning a lesson in the wake of this that America has not in the wake of many sex abuse scandals within music and entertainment. What's happening in Canada right now, if you're not Canadian. If you are Canadian, sorry, I'm like women-splaining this to you. In Canada, a lot of the major festivals there are doing things like providing sexual assault prevention and training for everybody who is on staff, who is on the grounds, who is working within the festival in any way. As far as I know, no American festival is doing this. They are also dealing with it on a scene-to-scene, city-to-city level. One of the women who tweeted at me this last August said that she had been sexually assaulted by her boss at a prominent festival there. And I looked at this tweet, and the first 6 replies were all from men that I knew within music journalism who worked with her. And all 6 of them were unwavering support, and all of them started with, "I believe you." And I thought, what's going on in Canada that people aren't getting here? Because the women I know that tweet about their experience with sexual assault get basically the opposite. And what has happened up there is that people decided, after the wake of Jian Ghomeshi and how far-reaching that was, and that there was, a decade of women who came forward and said, this happened to me at his hands, and no one cared. People said, okay, this is never going to happen again. and they started showing up for the women in these communities. And what this meant, in some cases, at the local music magazine in Toronto now, they had a series of staff meetings where they talked really frankly about what their role was in dealing with this, in accountability, in their relationship to some of these people who'd been named in these scandals. And also listening to the women that they worked with, to the women in the music scene, about what their experience had been, and just listening and believing them. I can't imagine that happening at like any American publication. I can't imagine that happening at like a record label or a booking agency or anything here. And as long as we keep not doing things like that, I don't know how there will be a concerted effort, a sea change, something radically different to deal with, these sort of successive scandals that are coming out. And until we do have that level of accountability, I don't believe that anything will actually really change. We will have people coming out on Twitter because there is literally no other avenues, and we will rise up and we'll say, I believe you, and there will be communities of women generally that support them. I think slowly everybody else is getting the picture. I think one of the things that we can do is really look around and start paying attention to who is at shows, who isn't at shows, who feels safe here, what are the general conditions around us that make women and other marginalized people feel safe, what makes them feel like there's community. I think one of the things, aside from just general accountability, is that if you look around in your field and you are, say, on a panel here, and there are no women on your panel, or it's all white guys, ask the organizer, ask anybody you can who had anything to do with putting it together, why weren't there any women on the panel? And then the next time someone asks you to be on a panel, say that you're not going to be on a panel unless there are women on the panel. Ask for, personally, when I do a panel, I say I won't speak on a panel unless there's a person of color and another woman on here. Because oftentimes, being the only woman on a panel, lots of people think like, oh, I'm sort of going to wear this person like a ring, and like, oh, we checked our diversity box. And then that woman gets tasked with talking about what it's like to be a woman in the music industry, which, having been in the music industry for 20 years and all the times I've come to CMJ and South by Southwest, only one other time in like 22 years have I ever been asked to talk about something that wasn't being a woman in the music industry. Women have all kinds of expertise. People have all kinds of expertise and things that they can talk about that aren't just their gender. And I think we're kind of past that point of just constantly bringing a woman in for like this sort of like consciousness raising value. We should be allowed the full breadth and depth of our knowledge and our expertise to be added into the conversations that are being had in our communities, in our scenes, and within our industries. One of the other solutions is look at the barriers for entry, whether it is into your scene, whether it is into, if you are in a position of employing other people. Where are you advertising a job? How are you networking for a job? Oftentimes, people look for people of the very same background that they have. And what you wind up with is like homogenous offices full of white guys. No offense, white guys. I see some of you here. Thank you. The other barriers for entry when we even go to a show is this club accessible? Meaning, can people get here if they don't drive? Can people feel safe here? Is the area around the club well lit? I used to live right by the Empty Bottle in Chicago, a great little club that's about 4 or 5 blocks from my old house. And I loved to go to shows there. They started pretty late at night though, like 10. And when I would go there, in the winter, I wouldn't ride my bike there because it'd be all icy, and so I'd walk. But I would walk to the show in the middle of the street the whole way because there's a lot of alleyways, and, dark corners and such. And I would just think like the whole time I'm walking the show, just kind of like, just constantly like looking over my shoulder and, you know, carrying your keys between your fingers. So it's like a weapon. So imagine that, say, most of the women who are coming to the show, that is their experience of getting to the show. That part's not really visible to everybody else at the show, but that is a different stake of show going. That is a different, it puts you in a different mind frame. It is a reason that maybe you don't go to shows unless you really, really, really want to be there. And when people look around and they say, oh, there's not many women at this show, women don't like this kind of music, women don't like black metal, women don't like rap, women love, like whatever we supposedly don't like or don't get. Maybe it's because we don't feel safe at that show. Maybe it's a real, like, kind of sketchy hassle to get there. And so when people are either setting up clubs or just looking at their club or looking where they book shows, you know, even if you're just someone in a band, you can make really concerted choices to try to do things in a way that make them accessible, that make them safe. And I think there's lots of times a sort of backlash to like, why should a show be safe? Because especially you hear this from like people in the punk community, I think, like it's supposed to be dangerous here. You know, that's like the deal. This is like a place of like rebellion and everybody's like doing whatever the fuck they want. If you can't hang, then, you know, why are you here? No one's looking for this to be like some sort of like ultra PC like lockdown and everyone at the show goes by these rules or whatever, right? That's how people play it. What it really is let's say particularly when you're at a punk show or a punk club or someplace that maybe the dancing or the atmosphere tends towards violence. If you are someone who out in the rest of the world, you are more prone to experience violence and harassment and that sort of thing on the street, being at a show where that is inherently part of the, like pushed on you as part of the appeal, that's a pretty big pill to swallow. And I think that is part of the reason sometimes we wind up with punk scenes that are exclusively white dudes. So there's that. You know, the other thing too about safety is that it's not just about like literally physical safety. We can use the example of how sometimes safe spaces have been getting created in the last year. Some of you might have already been out at this club in the last few days, but Beerland is a club here in Texas that infamously dealt with some of these issues basically after they were shamed on the internet about how someone was treated there. My friend Lorena Cupcake, who is a trans writer in Chicago, came down here on a punk rock vacation basically to go to shows, and they were there at the club and were getting harassed by someone who was kind of maybe someone who mattered in the scene, somebody who was in a band, who was a little drunk and kind of wouldn't let them alone. And Lorena went to the bartender or someone within the club, and they basically gave her the line, wow, oh yeah, he's like that when he's drunk. He's kind of an asshole. You know, more or less an excuse. And it ruined their night. They ended up leaving, not the asshole. And Lorena came home and wrote a really moving account of their night there and what that was like to be in that space and have people be indifferent to their experience of harassment and being made to feel unwelcome, and the different stakes of unwelcome when you are a trans person of color. And what ended up happening is Beerland learned from their mistake and went from being part of the problem to being a beacon of the solution, which they, within a matter of days, instituted a zero tolerance policy on harassment, and they posted it around, and they were very transparent in the changes that they were going to make within their venue. What did that cost them? That cost them nothing. So venues that tell you that somehow this is like a hassle to try to create a safe space, they're bullshitting you. Most of the time it does not take any training. It just takes people not making excuses. Maybe someone might have to Xerox a sign. Hopefully people can get that together. You know, and that sort of gets us to one of the solutions is not making excuses and And aside from just seeing people and taking in their experience and trying to understand what it might be like for people that aren't you to experience a show or to be trying to make music or trying to have a night out with their friends at a bar. Aside from that, we can look at the common excuses that are sometimes made for this, that allows this kind of behavior to go on. You know, we can all probably think of 5 people in our local scenes where it's like, oh yeah, that guy's kind of an asshole. But maybe that asshole is in a pretty decent band that people might want to play with. Or maybe that asshole promotes shows. Maybe it's somebody that people are sort of collectively in the debt of. And if that person is being a jerk to women or other people on a regular basis, they probably just have a rep as being creepy. One thing we can do is when we hear someone described as creepy, we ask that person, why? Why is this person a creep? And we can listen to them, whatever their experience might be, and we can believe them. A lot changes when you just start to ask people what their experiences are, and you listen, and you believe them, and you don't make excuses for that person, whether they are your friend, you know, whoever has perpetrated something against them, that you don't make excuses for that person, regardless of who they are, or, you know, the thing of like, oh yeah, he's got a weird sense of humor. That one's kind of my favorite. Or that, yeah, he's like that when he's drunk. As long as we keep making excuses for people, we allow a very unwelcoming space for other people. And we're giving priority to the assholes. And I don't think any of us actually want to be part of that. It's hard when you are a up-and-coming band or a struggling musician to feel like you have probably any space at all to try to make a change or demand that something be different, because you're probably like, you know, maybe you're second of 5 on a Tuesday night in Lawrence. What can you do? One idea, and this is for bands managers, you know, young booking agents, is when you're booking a show, you can ask, you know, casually and without apology, as if you expect an answer, you can ask people, what's your safe or spaces policy? Or you can say, what's your club's harassment policy? And just make it plain, as if you expect them to have one. And imagine if you are the club person on the other side, and in the span of a month, 20 different bands ask you this. You're going to start thinking that you need one, whether you know what the hell it is or not. And as long as we start assuming that this is something a club should have a reasonable idea of how to address safety within their club beyond, like, you know, fire exits, and have real regard for the people who are patronizing the place. You know, it allows people a pathway to get it together. And then also, once people do have those things in place, we can recognize where are the places that we should be doing shows, the places we should be patronizing, and the different ways that we can reward good behavior, basically, and good ideas, and start creating more and more examples of how we can make just and equitable spaces for all people that want to participate in music. Because one of the things that I don't think is a practical solution, though it is a very bold one, is, say, the band's BDRTs making like a hotline, which to me, I think that's like an incredible idea. But clubs should be shamed by the fact that bands are resorting to creating basically a text hotline where if you are being harassed at a show, they will send their t-shirt person or their sound person to come intervene and find you. Because people just expect at this point, here's this band, you know, who's doing well in the world and they're trying to use their power for good. If the band themselves is being more accountable to their audience than the places putting on the shows, than the scenes that these shows are happening in, we should really be embarrassed by that. And so hopefully people can address that. Another thing is, if you are in a position to be the boss of people, if you are in a position of power at all, you can make sure to communicate to the people that are maybe at the lowest rungs of your organization what sort of atmosphere you're trying to create. Let them know that they can come to you with anything that has happened to them there, even if it is the person who is your right hand, who is your best friend, that if you can be part of people's solutions, if they can feel like there is a place that they can go if something is happening to them, someone who will believe them. Most of the time, people, particularly when they are like, you know, an intern level, or, I mean, even if you're running things, sometimes there is not a road of recourse to make the thing stop. And you don't want to be the beer land. You know, you don't, if you get woke today, you don't have to be Twitter shamed tomorrow. I mean, I think we can kind of like work in hopes of that. And I think lastly, one of the really main things, aside from respecting people's expertise and, you know, paying women accordingly, if you treat your employees well, if you're known as a place that is at the vanguard of making these changes, you will be able to attract like top talent. You will be able to work with really good people because there are a lot of people who are very, very talented who are working at places where they're treated really, really shittily because they think that's the best job they can get in music. I know a lot of people in that situation. I've been in that situation previously. And it makes it so that very talented people who are treated shittily are very, very easy to poach. If you value the people that work with you, treat them really well, particularly women. And I think the last thing is that we should all be asking ourselves what we can do to be part of the solution in our every action within music professionally. Are we underlining basically bad behavior? Are we excusing people? Are we turning a blind eye to things? I think we can make really bold changes by virtue of a lot of small choices and a lot of small decisions that might seem like they don't have a real immediate impact, but I feel like a lot of people right now are really tired of, you know, every few months dealing with the weight of watching one of these really unfortunate situations unfold on Twitter. And I think all of us really want to have traction with this and feel like we're going to get to a space where this isn't just happening and kind of nothing comes of it. And maybe this person kind of disappears from music and we consider that a solution. I don't think that's the solution. I think the solution is making this be a space and a place where all people feel like they can participate and that they are seen as people and that they are seen as being of value. So that is my well-caffeinated talk for the morning. I can't tell if I've been talking for like 11 minutes or like an hour and a half. I don't know if this is part of it. Do we have time for questions? Yes, I'm getting a nod. If anyone has any questions or would like to share their own experiences. Person with the hand.
So I'm here in official research capacity, and as an instructor, particularly in communications and media classes, there's a lot of interest from my students in getting involved in the media industry. I'm wondering how to integrate these concerns and solutions to curriculum and resources for college students who might want to enter in music.
Did everyone hear what she said? Okay. There's a mic. Hey. I think everyone pretty much heard that. She's looking for resources for her media students about what. Cool. There's a mic person here. So what can we do to? I mean, this is a hard one. When I go and I talk to college students, particularly young journalism students, and you just don't want to be like negative Nancy, you know, be like, go find a job where you're appreciated. I think one of the things you can do is bring in different people's accounting of what their experience in the industry is. I think another thing to do is encourage people to find, look at them, you know, you can look at the mastheads of magazines, websites, whatever. What are the sort of voices that are being lofted? Does this seem like a place that is encouraging to women? Are there people of color on the masthead? Are there people of color and women and queer people at the top of this organization? I think sometimes that's a really good indicator too of where are places where they might get a little bit more of a fair shot. I think you have to be realistic with people too, because it's a struggle getting into any field of work and finding a career, let alone one that's like, dwindling and competitive like journalism and media. But also, journalism and media historically has been something where we have Black media, we have queer media, we have women's media, or if you're a woman working in one of these fields, that you would just wind up in like some of the niche spaces for women, because it's a place where you can actually climb the ranks. So I think exposing them to different narratives within those, and also telling them to keep their eyes on places that do have, a diversity of voices. I don't know any exact resources, but I know they exist. You should talk to Jim DeRogatis, who's back there in the back row, who teaches some of these things. He might know a few things. He might know a thing or two. I know he does. Hand. Mic person, thank you.
So thanks for being here today, first off. I'm a big fan of your work. I was a music journalist. That's how I made most of my money for 4 years. I went back to grad school, and I realized that I didn't want to do it anymore, and I have tried to assess why I did that, because I still enjoy writing album reviews and doing interviews with musicians, and I do it on a freelance basis now. And I had a conversation with one of my interns at the magazine that I work for now, and she was telling me that she wants to be a music journalist, but she's very scared to go to shows by herself, which I remember that often being the case with me, and I was often at shows by myself and being harassed, sometimes like physically, sometimes just verbally, and I realized I got out of it because I burnt out. Like, I couldn't face it anymore. I couldn't do it. And so, like, I wanted some words of encouragement to tell her of how not to burn out. Like, is there, like, something that you've done to, like, because I'm sure you've faced that.
Yeah. It's funny, I have those same sort of conversations, and periodically just, like, being like, you are a promising person. Maybe find a different, like, hobby. Make this a hobby. Make this not the thing that your whole life rests on, because it could come to like really not be meaningless, but be like a space of pain rather than like the thing that you love. I remember the last South by Southwest panel I was on. I was with on a panel with Lena Dawes, who is a veteran journalist in metal, yes, who wrote a really great book that everyone should read that is about Black women in hard music and metal. And she was talking about going to shows and people threatening to kill her. It's like these things are sort of like, I think, just tend to be invisible, and so it's really hard to tell somebody like, buck up, cowgirl, because that's not going to cut it. I don't know what are the words I have to encourage people. What I do not to burn out is I'm very fortunate to be part of a couple different online communities. There is a group that you're not supposed to talk about called Binders, that who's a non-cis male journalist can generally join and be part of and find community there, even if it is just everybody kind of having the same struggles, but also as a place to share opportunity and to be heard and to share your work and to get the reinforcement and value that you need, especially when you are a young journalist and perhaps easily discouraged by, anonymous commenters under your pieces, or the fact that you're covering a festival for $50, or, if you are getting paid at all. And I think finding community is really good. A lot of things changed for me when I started working at Rookie, and some of my colleagues are here, some of my cheer squad, and that really did make all the difference, because even if I didn't have that person as a resource in the office to me, I had like my girls online, I could be like, you guys will not believe this. You know, and having a safe space to talk about things, I think, is really important. What's been really useful for me, particularly, is to find mentors. I have mentors that are both male and female. My boss at MTV, Dan Fearman, is like a really incredible person that lifts me up and supports my work. You know, but also my former mentor, Dori Shafrir, was at BuzzFeed, and she had a lot of experience coming from Rolling Stone, where she was one of the only women on staff, and she was a great guide for me for several years. And just having people where I could go, okay, big picture, this is what's going on for me. How can you help me? You know, give me some perspective. What's the big play here? You know, because sometimes I think you can get really mired in the day-to-day and feel really discouraged by that. And you can, not to be like, you can forget your dreams, but you can forget your dreams. And you can forget, like, okay, what can I do right now, even if I'm not getting paid, that's going to build my career, that's going to build my portfolio, that's going to allow me to do work that's meaningful to me, even if at work I'm being assigned, you know, charticles on, like, the top 10 most cutest emo bands you've ever seen in your life or whatever. And the reality of it is that we're basically going to have to, like, find those things ourselves, generally. Isn't this uplifting, guys? Is everyone having a fun South by Southwest?
Hey.
Hey.
So for me, volunteering for the music panels is a safe space because it gives me knowledge and access to otherwise I wouldn't have. And I hope you don't mind me saying that throughout your whole talk, you didn't mention once women with disabilities working in music journalism, right? So I feel very compelled to tell you I'm not gonna stop and I'm not gonna quit my dreams. I'm not gonna forget them. And that's why I was so excited to meet you, because I see you so strong and so visible, and that's something that I'm still working on. So not only did I wanted to tell you thank you, but I also wanted to tell you don't forget me.
I mean, that is a huge part of when we are talking about accessibility. And as was also brought to my attention earlier, there was a panel on accessibility that was proposed at South by Southwest that was rejected, and that the people that wanted to have that panel were forced to have it outside of South by Southwest. And yeah, that should have been included. And that is also part of this too, as well, of this grander talk about accessibility, because most clubs are not accessible to people. A lot of opportunities are also not accessible to people who have issues with just general accessibility. And I'm sorry that I didn't include you in my talk. No, I appreciate it. Does anybody else have any questions? There, other person with the hand.
Hey, this is kind of a long lead up to my question, but I had you speak in Madison a few weeks ago, so hey, thanks for coming, and it's nice to see you again. But the day after you spoke in Madison, I had a situation that really upset me happen. My friends and I at school started a music management company, and I was in a meeting for that company the following day, and there was an artist that we were supposed to have play who I found out was allegedly had assaulted his ex-boyfriend. So I said, of course, we can't have him play. That takes away from any possibility of having a safe space. And a guy who founded the company with me was arguing with me. And I said, if we have him play, like, I will quit this company. It is not so important to me that I'm going to, like, get rid of my integrity. And so he basically was like, okay, quit. Like, we're having this artist play. And so I left the meeting, and I was really upset. And so it made me think of two things. The first is that it made me appreciate you as a female role model in music, because there are not many. But it also made me think, like, to me, quitting the company would be maintaining my integrity, and it wouldn't feel to me like quitting. And it would kind of just feel like getting out of a toxic environment that isn't ideal for me. So I guess like, what do you think is the difference between quitting to like maintain something that you are so fundamentally like offended by that you can't be around it, as opposed to just like quitting because you're too weak to like deal with it?
I don't think there's anything that you said that sounds like weak. We shouldn't have to be bulletproof. We shouldn't have to check our who and how we are and our knowledge of the world, our experience of the world, our feminism, our anything at the door in order to be employable in music. I can tell you I've never regretted any place that I've ever quit. And I've quit places for these exact same reasons that you have. And I've made a lot of choices about who I will work with and how, who I will take paid work from, who I will send work to, based on people who make those kind of decisions, as your business partner or your former business partner did. Maybe that guy did you a favor so that you can go start your own thing now and not have to bargain with somebody who thinks that doing business with people who hurt other people is an option.
Hey Jessica, how you doing?
I'm fine.
I've read your book like 20 times. I love your work. This is my question. I'm also a young kid. I'm a young writer trying to break out, and I've been published in big places. I've had articles with high view counts, and I'm looking for other places where I can work, but I'm being turned down constantly. The implication I got in my education was that if you're a good writer, you get published in big places and you have high visibility and high view counts, that would be like, you'd be just in. But I'm not finding that's the case. So as an editor at Pitchfork, what do you look for in somebody you want to hire? What other skills are necessary?
I no longer work at Pitchfork, so I can't tell you what they're looking for. It's okay. What I can tell you what I look for as an editor, regardless of where I'm working, which is people who have. I'm not so much looking for people who are perfect writers or generalists and they can write about anything. I am always looking for people who bring all that they are and their unique perspectives and experiences in music to bear on their criticism, on their reporting, and can make a unique take or a unique look at a story that helps us understand music in a bigger way, which I know sometimes is like a tall bill of order when a lot of people coming out of J school or college are not goaded towards that sort of journalism. But part of what I do as an editor is that I'm always trying to just open the door further and further and bring more and more people in with me. And that can mean, people covering kind of like far-flung genres in depth, things that we don't see, as part of the bigger narrative about, indie rock or, independent music within America. I'm really interested in what's happening outside of America or what's happening in like little regional scenes or people who don't have publicists. Like those are kind of the stories that I care about a lot. And also just people who are bringing, like I said, be it their politics, their identity, their gender, their sexuality, their, ability, their disability, whatever it is, into their experience of music, because I think that's what we need to hear, because we have enough people going like, this record is just okay because the production is kind of sucky, and, I like the first record better, like that. I don't care. I never need to read something like that again. So I like things with a lot of opinion, and I like it when people are not afraid to bring all those things in.
Sorry, can I put in an addendum though? What about, say, technical skills like HTML and CSS and Adobe? Those things.
I don't know. I've never hired anybody for any of those skills, but I think a lot of other places do.
Okay.
So, sorry. I've only had like 3 jobs ever. I was freelance for 19 years, guys, so I'm not like super editor. If there are any other questions or things you'd like to address with me privately, I will be outside this door. How about that? If you need to find me or ask a question. Goodbye.